Maybe I'll start because I think it's just in terms of my relation with Jeffrey Bawa, even if it was very fleeting in some ways. Uh, but there are people that in some way come into your life and it's like an imprint, you know, they're always present. And for me, he's, one of them. I'm sure Sana shares the same ethos. So I was asked just now, we were just having a quick interview, and I was asked the question of my relation to Jeff Bawa. And so for me, what has always, what he has provoked is, not so much about architecture, not so much about the landscape, but something more that I think is fundamental, the idea of a dialogue, between two entities, one of a physical man-made world and one of the natural world, but which is also reversible in terms of, for me, the idea that we're nature, uh, and that, this idea of man in nature, nature in man, and the way you can read that. But he sort of left, and I was there in, I think it was 96. I met him in the morning at that time, and I was telling Chandra that, I had long hair at that time, and he invited us over for tea to Lulu Ganga. And the same day I sort of had shaved off my head. We kind of distinctly, it was a kind of moment for both of us, I think. It was just, but anyway, visiting Lulu Ganga, it was overwhelming sort of being there because I'd seen it in plans, I'd studied it, every chair, even the weaving of every, it was sort of something that you sort of inhabit before you even go there. But there was one thing, in all of that, and I remember we were standing at the front porch and he was looking, I don't know the east-west, but not towards Lagoon, but looking into the distance. I think there is a Buddhist stupa, I think, south. Anyway, this moment that he says that, for me, there's too much architecture between me and the view. And I think that, I mean, it was a seminal, and it's something that, you know, just that, and it's many ways you can read it. It's not about, what is that view, and for me, this idea of view meaning depth of field, you know, and that's something that's always fascinated me. This idea of depth of field. Can we maybe start the slide? So the title of my lecture is Pocket Man, and you're kind of curious about it, and I can narrate it anyway, and why for me this particular selection. And it's basically a slide of, so I was traveling in Rajasthan a few years ago. Okay, maybe I'll back up a little bit. So for me, the Indian continent, and it's not so much about the, what is the, I don't want to call it the Indianness, but what is particular to our culture. And we have this sort of classic nod of the head, which kind of goes this way. We all do it intuitively. I mean, wherever we are, it sort of goes this way. And you're asking a question and you get this nod and you don't quite know if it's a yes or a no, right? And it's just the nod of the head depending on the speed, the way it moves, the expression on the face. There are a lot of things are spoken and remain unspoken, and so for me, it's, I think, somewhere that idea of, it's in the gap that things happen. It's not in the yes or the no, but it's in between the yes and the no. And so for me, that's really been my curiosity, my fascination of, things unsaid or things said. And again, like classically, if you could be working or there's, on the street or, something. I think we all experience that. You ask a question on a Monday, and you'll get this kind of nod of the head and say, and they say, I don't know, and you come back on Tuesday and you ask the same question again, right? But it's the way you've asked the question, and you possibly get a reply, "Pehle kyun nahi bataya?" We've all experienced this. I think it's in that demeanor, in that exchange, right? For me, this idea of, what is important, if I put something out there that if there is something, at least which I'm beginning to discover, these are sort of all observations more recently that have occurred. But if there's one thing, because I'm always asked this question, what is your view on craft and that, and architecture, and, so for me, it's just a medium of expression, nothing more. I've been professionally trained in that. That's how I know how to describe or make language. So I use it more as language, as a means of communication of something. Uh, but coming back and so yeah. So for me, it's not that saving the craft or this idea of continuity. I'm saying that if there is one thing that is out there that is truly our tradition, in the truest sense, right, which will enable and allow for continuity, there's one thing and only one thing in terms of an action that we take. Right. So, there's always this concern, oh, we're going to build, whether I'm in Japan, we all talk about it, oh, we're losing this, or we're losing that, or we're losing this. And for me, there's this sort of line which I've come to understand that nothing is lost, it's only obscured in time. Which brings me back to the question that I put forward that if there is one thing that is a tradition, what is it really true? It's not a trick question. And it's universal. There are no boundaries, no geography. Within gravity, right, there's only one expression of that affection. Affection as an exercise of transference. What we're talking about is how do we transfer through how we write, how we speak, what we cook, how we read, just our landscape. It's all what we're actually communicating back and forth is how do we communicate affection. And for me, that has no boundaries. That has no culture. It's universal, it's present, and it's there available to us, past, present, and hopefully future. Right? So for me, this is really the transaction, that I'm interested in is this, what does one, and I'm calling a transaction not as an economic one. Economies will be there. Economies are frameworks. Uh, so all of these sort of parameters that we have, whether it's an economical one or a non-economic, and I'm going to come to that. So I think that's really for me my sole interest is how does one provoke that between each other, in the nature of the work. And so for me, what is our craft? I'd say that is our craft, really, because it's not how well something is made, it's not how skillfully something is made. It's the motivation in how something is made. For me, that's more of value than how precise or imprecise it is. So there's this notion of, this idea of precision or imprecision. For me, that's completely okay. I like this idea of a resonating theme, something in which one can oscillate, something which has time built in. So again, I think again for me in this sort of brief interview, this idea of why do I choose to live here? For me, of course I've been brought up and born in Bombay, and for me it's a very unique city. I grew up, I was in the 60s. We were I think 5 million, and now we're 23 million. It's amazing how rapidly we grow, but the city in some way has a tenacity. I like the idea of the city as a sort of an outlaw city. And I don't mean outlaw in a sort of negative way, but things happen. It's in this ambiguity of things being precise and imprecise. Like if you really look at a map of Bombay, an official map of Bombay, it's not really because 10 million people they're not documented. They're visible, they're seen, they exist, they occupy space. And that yet in some way, they're not recorded as space, in drawings. So for me, just these sort of notions of ambiguity, and I think for me that, in Bombay, and I think there's something, 60 centimeters of space, there's a 60 centimeters of space that everybody has. It is not based on politics, it's not based on the BMC, it's not based on anything, right? It's basically the air that we actually physically take. So if you look at Bombay and if you look at the buildings, there's this 60 centimeters of projection that pretty much even institutional buildings have, these sort of box grills, what you see, something just to present an architectural opportunity in the ambiguous that is available, to all of us. And I'm saying that it's that idea of a gap of 60 centimeters that you can occupy. So I've seen boats in that, I've seen people sweeping, plants, clothes drying, laundry machines, all of this stuff kind of suspended in the air, and you see that if you drive around the city. For me, it's amazing. That for me is the architecture of the city, not the buildings really. Those are really the buildings. But coming back, another thing to me of interest, and which is very particular to our continent. So I'm going to just put this for you, just for something for you to think about. That we're the last, I think, landmass that has a nomadic living culture that is in more than a few million. And I'm saying that's the population of one country in Europe. Just to put things in perspective, that's how, and I'm talking, so my interest is in this idea of a nomadic, that we have, that's our bandwidth of what you see today, digitally produced artificial intelligence, and this, how does one negotiate? How does one find a bridge, or how does one find a conduit that allows all of this to in some way disseminate between each other? So for me that's really what I'm very curious about, and I'm just putting this again for something for you to think about. That we actually work on, fundamentally, our DNA coding is based on a nomadic culture. Nomadic culture, the entire sense of time is based on the waxing and waning of the moon. Period. You know. We all know that. Come the monsoon here, you can pay the guy like you stay back, I'll pay you blah blah blah, whatever, construction, home, this, that, the other. They're going back. Nothing is going to. So this idea of like this whole country, if you can visualize this idea of a ebb and a flow of just people that are moving based on time. But then we also complain because we have loads of holidays because we enjoy Gregorian time and lunar time. Right? Gregorian time came in as an idea of control. When its mean time was when the seas were captured. Right? Lunar time is more a fluid time, more a liquid time, something that is, I don't want to say unpredictable, something that is unfolding. It's a visceral, intuitive, fractal unfolding. So the reason of the lecture and the idea of pocket man was, for me, the interest is where is that moment, for a brief moment in time, that these two can actually come together to make a space. So what I'm saying is what seemingly you would say that there's no space, right? You say in Bombay there's no space, and I'm just saying yes, there is space. We've got 60 centimeters, where there's a whole universe that can be created. For me, there's absolutely no reason why we should be short of water, and that's a separate, short of water, lack of light, and lack of air. This is a city that is actually abundance of it. It's just a question of how do you mitigate that, even within the constraints. So I'm not here making a prejudice of right and wrong, or a moral one of how things should be, or things, I'm saying what is the potential of what we have presently right now, and where do you find that gap? Right? So my work or my interest in all the work that one does is, and I'm going to refer back to Baba in a way that this idea of how do you leave something behind. So for me, it's not really about building, or it's not about the shape of the building, and I've come to a point that for me it's really not of interest in a formative one that, the form, for me the form is the expression of the affection, that's the aesthetic, right? But it's not just me making a project, right? It's several people. So for me, the only thing that now more and more, it was kind of interesting, what did I want to speak about? And this is something that, the only interest for me in making architecture is how can a group of people come together, like in a dance, and so to understand or what if we could build an architecture of sound and not noise, and the sound of breathing. That's what you're actually embedding into the spatial, and that's the resonance that we feel. So whether we look at our temples, whether we look at what becomes sacred is that idea. So yes, it might seem impossible for me. The idea that there's a consciousness, right? And it's not about a consciousness about, how, it's about how one accommodates a field of moving parts, right? And of different degrees. from old to young, from skilled to unskilled, and finding this sort of this means like this movement of how when you see a dance, people go into the middle of the circle. So it kind of becomes a non-hierarchical one. There's a hierarchy, but only for a brief moment in time. I'm part of that dance. Yes, I have to put a framework. I give a framework, but that framework quickly moves. So it's so for me again going back to this idea of yes and no. It's about things unsaid, but things experienced. Because no matter what I do, when I communicate to you, I communicate to you. What I'm communicating, there's already an error taking place in how you are understanding it and how you're going to receive it before you give me a feedback. Right? It's that gap. That's what's diverse. That's what for me is diversity. It's because it's that resonance of our field of affection. Right? That's it's in constant movement. To say that, and that's why when we talk about whether it's Biriwala Baba in Bombay, who there's a book called I Am That, and so when we talk about that's that moment where it's just completely centered, that resonating field. When we say that you're centered, it's not that you're not moving. You're just moving at such a rapid speed that it appears to be the center. You are overlapping over zero that many more times. There's a plus, there's a minus, and there's zero in between. And the speed of this resonating field gives you the perception of what we're calling stillness. So, for me, these are the things that are of interest. And I wanted to show you slides because it is, okay. No, not that. It's that much of a disaster. Yeah, you can just open the internet. I can show you, I don't know, whatever that, but I don't know if I like you. So anyway, so since there was Pocket Man then, so I was traveling to Nagaon, and just to give you a visual, so we have this classic bandi, the white bandi in Rajasthan, they wear Gujarat, and I was buying these pitchforks, not for any interest, but yeah, yeah. So there you go, good, perfect timing. So there. So this was on the way to Nagaon, it was for a music festival, kind of whatever, a few years ago. And I'm always curious because I think what's unique about us today, and I think that's for me that sort of fine balance. I'm okay with industry, I'm okay with economy, and I'm good with that. But this idea of that potential overlap, like the idea of a sphinx, lion and man, that the Egyptians have already started looking at that. Uh, but anyway, I'm coming to Pocket Man. Can we play slideshow? Okay, so don't. Okay, so let's go to Pocket Man. Yeah. So anyway, so there I am picking up. So it's quite wonderful. They have this sort of these brambles that they pick up and they make a pitchfork. Nothing to it. And if you look at it, it's a perfect representation of an extension of the hand. It's a mechanical device. Right? If you look at the pitchfork, right down to the seam. It's something that's evolved in time. It's super easy. They treat it, they bend it. I collect these things not from nostalgia or just collect them out of whatever it is that provoked the curiosity. There was something about that environment we stopped. And, but anyway, and so there's this one gentleman in this canary yellow t-shirt who I happened to buy the pitchforks. There's all these, I picked it up and then he said, okay, these are my pitchforks. But they're all, of course, uncles and brothers and all of them on, along the highway. And so anyway, I'm exchanging money and I'm, asking him like, how come you're dressed in this yellow t-shirt? So he kind of looks up at me and says, these guys who, these traveling salesmen, Fevicol companies or, they give us these free t-shirts. I said, okay, you get a free t-shirt. It's cotton, it makes sense, it's off that landscape and it's for free. I hand him the money and then he sort of next thing he kind of dives into his t-shirt. And I kind of look at it and I'm like, okay, damn, like perplexed. No, because I was not expecting that because it was trout, so I couldn't see that. And he took and pulls out the money. So I'm like, wow, how did he do that? And like, He kind of again looked up with a beautiful smile on his face. He said, I took it home, my wife cut it up, and she had this beautiful satin silk lining that still put inside. But for me, what was of interest in that is both exist. There is no prejudice that is being made on the situation that is present that right now at that moment that, oh, look what is happening to us. What might be seemingly being eroded. But there is no there is no prejudice to that. It's only in that moment, to find a space, because he still wears a dhoti, so dhoti doesn't have a pocket. Right. All his other relatives are all in the white bandi, and that's why I see the picture there that, for me, that's the movement of that, that's both, it's a Lucio Fontana touch. For me, it is, in some way, because he's showing you a space that apparently wasn't present, but has always been there. So for me, really, this is really the basis of observing the landscape and, observing the landscape in real time every time. Actually, I wanted to this morning in, anyway, some other time was just to show, photographs that I take through the day, every day, of just things in the landscape. And I kind of looked at it today just out of curiosity. I'm like, okay, this could have been something, but it's okay. It's, part in some way connected to that. I'll go to the next slide. I know I've spoken for a bit long already, so will you? So for me, this idea of, if there is a constant, the only constant that we actually experience is change. So for me, this idea of rate of change, so, and that's for us the part that we find, Herculean. How do we rate of change of affection? There's so much movement going on that that's actually by just moving affection is what can create. You can travel distance and in speed. You can cover distance in a short time in changing, in having rate of change, but rate of change of what? Affection. It's about giving up prejudice. For me, that's really the only thing, and the practice of that. So I think in some ways the idea of breathing, pranayama, yoga, whatever, all of these things, it's really the practice of that. But anyway, that's another subject altogether. Civilization is built on an aqueous footing, a world that is in constant flux, a culture continually in an ebb and flow. Can we go to the next? So this is actually something, a short film that I took in mind. Let's go to the next. Yeah, it's working. This is on the Ganges, but just for me, what was interesting about this, and it was just something that happened in this moment. I remember it was 6:30 in the morning, and again, I'm in Varanasi, and for me, Varanasi really in some way, I take I teach, and the first day of class, I take all my students straight to Varanasi. They've never been there. And for me, it's particular because birth, life, and death all are on the same platform, on exactly the same latitude. There are no borders. There is complete transparency of air, wind, light, and water that is resonating between these three states. So for me, Varanasi in some way best describes that. And so if you took, in a way, to map India, for me, like the quickest way in some way to kind of get inside a framework is to go to Varanasi for 3 days, and then straight up from there go up to Ladakh. And in that bracket, there's a whole universe. There's an entire universe out there, so anyway, I'm just, I'm not going to show you all the slides now, but so this is actually, it's a photo taken by a colleague of mine. We work very closely. He lives in Surat. But we are talking about ebb and flow. We're talking about this boundary of, what I don't want to say, yeah, it's that gap. I think that's the best way to present it. But this is a slide of a quarry, and this was in Rajasthan. There was a barge, as they say, a flood in March, and they make these beautiful stone structures in the quarry because there are no trees. So this actually becomes the shelter. So you have this entire landscape of structures as they run through the quarry. So there's, of different dimensions, intentions, and this was just one of them. And so this idea of, anticipating time, right? This moment of another possibility, there was a flood, and this entire quarry is covered with water, and it sort of reveals this whole other landscape, which was always present there. So I'm just for me, it's just that it's a brief moment in time. It's a measurement of time because if you think of stars and if I say that if for me when you look up at the sky, right, it's for me a mirror reflection of the earth because to view ourselves you need distance. You can't view yourself so close. So this idea of time also that becomes sort of important. This idea of when two stars sort of come together, what is that measurement of time? It's fleeting and it's an entire, right? So I'm saying that that's the opportunity of space that's available for how one can potentially enter into making architecture. I'm calling it economy of means, path of least resistance. This idea of, and yeah, this idea of when Gandhi talks about path of least resistance, and I'm not, I mean, it's this idea of how by moving with the least amount of movement, you can traverse depth of field, right? And this was a lecture I remember on the in Kemoldo, I think opposite Kemoldo, there's I forget the name of the organization. It's at the tip of my tongue, but I remember it was beautiful. They were talking about Mirza Ghalib, this idea of this poet, and there was this conversation going on, and it was in Urdu this idea of depth of field, and it beautifully the notation for it in language was despair. And it's a very beautiful way to express this idea of depth of field. But it's not one of despair because that despair in some way, because we're all confronted with I don't want to say the weight of gravity, but gravity itself. It's the only true egalitarian force that acts upon us across continents, right? It's equal. Our negotiation and our response back to it, right, is what I think is one wants to observe. So this idea of craft, this idea of making, this idea of tradition, this idea of history, this idea of objects, and I know you're a big collector of things, and I think what you're and it's not a collecting in a collecting way, but it's about being transferred. So you're merely a conduit as a collector. So for me, this idea of collect. What is it that you're doing? It's just a moment of transfer that's taking place. Uh, you can see beautiful things on the street here in Bombay. These vendors selling comic books and sometimes a sort of noisy little thing that's beautifully colored and so on and so forth. Sorry, I'm kind of bantering away on a different direction, but coming back to my slide. So anyway, this is about ebb and flow. So this is outside Surat. These are boats that are allowed to be there, fishing boats. They don't have a motor boat, so they don't need a particular kind of license. So in low tide, basically, it's a completely informal industry, I'm calling it. That's how cities are made right now here in India. So I'm just observing what constructs a city, what are the phenomena that construct a city, the frameworks that allow for this unfolding to occur. And so it's wonderful that in the low tide, these boats go out into the estuary. They dredge the sand from the estuary. And in the high tide, they come back. They're allowed to exist that way. It's that line between a motor and no motor. You can see that, and there's this sort of idea of, so that's why that civilization is built on an aqueous footing. I'm also saying aqueous footing not for anything else, but all our cities here in India and in this continent. Water, what is a piazza to Rome, a water tank is something. So you can see how the structures begin to evolve. Maybe go to the next, you tap there next. No, go back up one, sorry. You can see the structure slowly now next. That's what then gets built between the formal and the informal. Right. This is new. This is something that's now been taken over. So this idea of palimpsest, you know. So for me, the idea of architecture that it can provide for a space for palimpsest, an overlay of things, you know, for a civilization that we don't know yet. You know, we don't know what it's going to be. So to provide a sort of framework or an imprint, you know, and that for me, that idea of there's too much architecture between me and the view. Water, air, and light. Colorless, transparent, odorless liquid which forms the seas, lakes, rivers, and rain as is the basis of the fluids of living organisms. Air, the invisible gaseous substance surrounding the earth, a mixture mainly of oxygen and nitrogen. Light, the natural agent that stimulates sight and makes things visible. I just want to, for me, this is material. You know, this is material. So when I say man in nature, nature in man, right? We are constructed of water. Light, you know, when we talk about, so for me, the idea of light is something that is internal, you know, affection exists in that light of an internal space, but receives, you know, so it's a sort of back and forth. So what is inside can be outside, and what's outside can be inside. So this idea of interiority and exteriority that we talk about. So it's not about, it's about enclosure. It's not about transparency, because we don't just record space with our sight. We can record space with sound. We can record space through our skin. We can record space through something that could exist 1,000 miles away too. It's how do you make contact? What are the means of communication, and how do we register space? Is through our senses. So anyway, I don't know how much time do we have? 10 minutes. So this is a project in Alibag, and I'm showing this to you because what I discovered, you know, and no, I don't want to get into a psychoanalytical framework out here or anything like that, but I was a Cesarean child, so maybe, and I was intensely, and I still am very much connected to water. And I don't think it's got anything to do with swimming, but it's something that's very close to me. This idea of the presence of water being around me all the time, and all my work that I discovered, you know, sort of starts at that moment that somehow the sense for water, that's the sort of umbilical cord, you know, that connection that is made, is sort of always present in the work that I've discovered. Of course, this has happened, this has evolved. It's not a conscious decision, it's something that sort of, you know, you do things and then you observe them and you begin to start having a sense or an insight of, you know, what provokes the work that occurs. But again, I say water being present because for me that's the one thing that will endure time. That is one thing that will enable, you know, a civilization, you know, even if for a brief moment in time that we, for some reason, cease to exist, the presence of water will allow for that to re-emerge. You know. Anyway, so for me, the project here it's a house, for a multi-generation house in Alibag. We found this hole in the ground, which is a, sort of in a way a navel or a belly button. There was sweet water there. It's very close to the ocean. Next. So yeah, this is, and it's quite fascinating because, you know, what does a water diviner mean? So what is the operative word here? Diviner. We're talking about a divinity, you know, a sixth sense, an intuitive capacity to connect to some kind of vibration. And so this gentleman, he's a professional well builder. He's been doing this since he was a kid. I was interesting, but I think he was, and he's got these crutches because the, he was as a young teenager at that time actually fell while constructing the well and nearly lost his life, but then did this for the rest of his life. So for him, it's this sort of, it's a divinity, and my hair standing now, and I'm talking about it. Yeah, and it was so precise because we wanted to keep the water. And he said, if you have to dig, if you need to make a structure, you need to leave. It was like a crevice about this big, like just a 2 inches wide, 1 inch high, and he says this is the flow of water. So over time, you've got to kind of build an arch over this. The foundation had to kind of straddle over that little gap. Because he says in time, with gravity, you don't want to close that gap. You know, it's fascinating. So anyway, this is a conversation, and it's also gestures. You know, I was talking about that idea of what is said and what is not said, and why did you not ask me? For me, yes, it's about how this kind of unfolding takes place. So you kind of, in a sense, have to anticipate things. You know, you put things in a certain array, right, allowing for these sort of pollinations or cross pollinations or these moments to occur, but you have to be in contact, you have to be in observation, you have to be connected for that to sort of occur. I don't know how to, you know, so for me, that's the part that I enjoy most about architecture. For me, that's the only thing for me that is the greatest joy, because for me in that there's discovery of how little you actually know. Yeah, so there's him there, and then he conducts the whole village, and they build this thing. It's a very precise cut. Uh, drawing which was made, so it was a sort of inner chamber of his house, and so it's a space that collects water. It's sort of like the belly button. The house is arranged. The plan of the house is sort of, in a way, this sort of protective enclosure around it that protects the belly button. And again, so for me, sustainability, no, not interested, not in a way of, you know, sustainability, you know, that what we can sustain, or what for me the practice to sustain is that idea of affection. How does one build the capacity at rate of change, at speed, traversing distance? How does one maintain that idea of center? Right? Because in that there is no prejudice. But anyway, so I'm not saying that yeah, in some way I use architecture as a medium to practice that, right? It's a language for me, like for a writer or for a gardener who is nurturing a role. You know, I'm just saying that to think of the capacity of a man, sort of, you know, there's a beautiful Peter Sellers movie, and he's a gardener in that movie. I don't remember the name of the film. But he nurtures this idea of nurturing a flower, that to think that 200 years later this flower is going to bloom, and the scent could traverse the entire planet, you know, just as a conceptual idea. It's not something that's not imaginable. It can be done. That's our capacity. You know, for me, that's our capacity. Anyway, so this is a space that fills up. That was during the monsoon. So if it's full moon, it's high tide, right? If it's full moon, it's high tide, and there's constant rain. That's when everything backs up. And it's just for that moment of 4 hours or 6 hours, just in that shift, in that little adjustment, that you can again let things move again, right? So this idea of allowing a flow, you know, today what we're talking about, you know, whether we talk about floods, you know, naturally made or man-made, or, you know, it's about an idea of flow, you know, and kind of being in that seamless flow where you allow that. So it's an observation, and I think our difficulty, if I would say that, is how do we find a space or a practice that allows us to operate between these two understandings of time? Because they're both. To say today that Greenwich Mean Time is not part of my DNA would be a folly. It's not possible. So to dismiss it would be a folly, and to dismiss the other one would be a folly. For me, at least, it's this idea of where is that overlap. So it's kind of interesting. Yeah, that's the diagram. Sorry, there these. Maybe I'll stop there. It's not working. Okay, anyway, that's the plan. And you see these little dots here in the middle out there. That's there. But so the rain, all rain is collected. So this, for me, the house will at some point dismantle. It's made out of wood, bones. At some time, it'll dismantle. What remains is the core. What's left behind, for me, that's the architecture. That's, for me, my interest. So this is something up in the Himalayas. We'll just run through these slides. Go next. Yeah. It's, again, this idea of a hybrid. You know, I had to build up there, never built up in the Himalayas. There's an amazing building culture. India as a country, and actually not just India, I've noticed an issue globally that there's a building culture. And again, when I'm talking about man in nature, nature in man, this idea of material, what does material mean? And I'm saying that man is material. Without our engagement, there is no material. And it is in that engagement with that material that that material has the ability to communicate back how it wants to be handled. So whether you're in China, whether you're in Peru, whether you're in India, whether you're in Switzerland, stone as a method of construction is fundamentally exactly the same. It's just the expression of the language because of the color of the sky, the color of the earth, or what is available, that gives it that nuance. But at its core, it's all exactly the same. And I'm saying it's in that communication. So why do you then begin to discover that these were running in parallel across continents? Right. That's the exchange. Man in nature, nature in man. For me, that's what I'm beginning to recognize. So anyway, this is up in the mountains. These guys know how to build, and how deep should the foundations be. They've been doing this. It's a dry stack masonry. The proportions are such, and the moment again this idea of proportion. For me, proportion is not 20 feet by 10 feet. Proportion is based on the aesthetic of proportion is based on the idea of affection. And it's not just human affection that I'm talking about, it's the affection of the feet to the ground. It's this entire sort of ontological landscape. Ontological is like this. It's an entire universe of mathematics, botany, biology, philosophy, etc., etc., etc. Everything is contained in this universe. And it's in that unfolding of that. For me, learning only can happen in discovery. There is no learning otherwise. So for me, really, this is, for me, the project. This will actually happen later, but this idea of a field that I wouldn't say was abandoned, for momentarily it had transited. So this could be just landscape walls and stairs that somehow become a sort of piggyback for other sort of transient construction to come and place upon it. So when the property is given back, because it was rented from the farmers for a period of 10 years, I think they might have extended it. But this whole idea that, and again, this idea of not so much about lightness in a sense of lightness, that it allows the opportunity for it to re-emerge in every way that it can exist. It's always complete in its incompleteness. For me, that's the architecture. So yeah, we made this. It's a wood frame house, on the beach. For me, it was actually a time when I was going through, for the first time, this idea of writer's block. I never knew what this was, but it was incredible. It's the most difficult time for me in my life. But it's kind of interesting for me. This project actually, in some way, gives me a sense of, how do I say this, like a self-portrait. It's the house in some way. It's forest, and what is next? So the whole thing breathes. And so what I discovered, this idea of inside, outside, we were talking, and again, going back to the well, I kind of just missed that. So the sweet water diaphragm, and there's a diaphragm, the sweet water is up here, salt water is here. Salt water is heavier, so it allows the sweet water to remain. And there was a certain depth that my master, the well builder had said that that's how deep you go. And it's wonderful because that became a vessel that recorded time. So if you went during the high tide, it would leave a sort of wet mark. And if you came 2 hours later, the wet mark. So it's actually, I don't, so the presence of the sea is even more heightened without me seeing it. So it's not about the sight anymore, right? That I'm actually inside a space. And I was reminded because the same thing happened here again. It was a full moon night. In one particular room, it's completely enclosed by these louvers, but you can hear the sound like the atmospheric air that's outside is exactly what you're experiencing inside. The sounds that you hear outside, you hear inside. There's no filter. The only thing you have is this sort of these louvers that are made from it's what's the word for it? It's a palm tree, but I'm forgetting the name right now. Uh, but anyway, so it's the bark of that, and it's just because it's a 30-year span, it's in a Supari Grove and focused location. Again, this is a palimpsest that has taken place. We traded with Africa, pepper, cinnamon, all of that, coconut. It was actually all tropical evergreen rainforest that got cut down, hundreds of years ago. And this is a landscape now, and it has these aqueducts and wells and water. And so for me, the only thing that was of interest was this idea of irrigation through this. There was already a trace, a landscape. So for me, these buildings in some way will dissolve. They will eventually come down. But for me, what was fascinating was the full moon was reflected in the louvers. So you actually had the presence of the moon on the inside. And so that's, for me, the moment where, things unseen, there's too much architecture between me and the view. So I think for me, these are the phenomena for me that I'm curious about. Next. So this is in Kanchipuram in Kanjivaram. And so I'm just giving you a window into how Hampi was built. Hampi, Hampi. Everything's made out of granite. It's only 500 years old. It's not that old. Right? Walls, beams, aqueducts, doors, just one material, granite. And it was a kingdom. But anyway, this guy, there's a whole quarry there. It's been over 5 generations, 4 families, and the only tools that they have is a chisel, a hammer, and a crowbar. That's it. And they can build you architecture of Hampi today with these 3 materials. Right? What they do is they put this quarry, they hear the sound, they make these holes depending on how deep you want to go, and they make these holes that you kind of see. That's all been hand cut. It's all been hand cut, and it is living present day right now. So I am saying that we can build what has been built. I don't want to say in the past. It's still present as well. That's our true capacity. Just to put it, and to say, and I'm saying for not more money. Because here's the thing, the crazy part is, this is being excavated to cover septic tanks. These slabs, they're 10 feet, 12 feet thick, completely, and it's quite amazing. So they make these holes, they drive these sort of chisels into the ground, another, and there's a moment where the entire plate just like pop, opens out. Making space where seemingly there is no space. You're just, and this is something that I'm more curious about now, and maybe I'm going to give up a little bit on the slide. What I discovered, like an Adivasi hut, because I have a small little place, sort of transient temporary place that I'm using, given to me by my friends in Alibag, and right next to me there's a sort of village of Adivasis who are forest dwellers, right? People of the land of that place, but who have been displaced. They're not in the forest anymore. I had to move in like 2 weeks, like with 15 dogs, 18 years worth of work, blah, 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 boom, I had to. And so anyway, and so with them I've built this structure very much. It's an Adivasi hut. But every night that I slept in it, and this I know for a fact, that the morning that I woke up, I always felt I had slept under the stars. And I don't know how to, there's no way to tabulate it. I don't have a way to record this recording in some way. Okay, maybe it's something that I made up and it's my own myth. But I truly do believe that, and again, it's not about going back to that. I'm not saying to go back to that, but I'm saying that to at least recognize that, being open to sky doesn't mean that you have to be open to sky in that physical sense, right? There can be a sense of a container that will still enable you to what's the word for it? To have osmosis through that space, because all you're doing is this, you've done that. But that's the action that's taken place. Tilt up slab. So you can make a 1:1 full scale drawing here, go there, da, 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 pop, and you can do like, cards or this folded paper, you can build a city overnight. Boof. I'm saying that's the potential. Yes, it's an imaginary one, but not. I don't think it's imaginary. It's physical. It's tangible. It's real. Okay, just dip through here. So again, this is another project. We've uncovered a old well-building method in the south just by collecting people and saying, okay, he kind of knows a little bit, someone else knows a little bit. Kind of reminds. I'm sort of inspired by this movie, a Russian filmmaker, and it's a film called Tarkovsky is the name of the filmmaker, and Andrei Zubylov. It's about this idea of building this bronze bell. He only knew fragments of what he had experienced as a kid. So it's just collecting these fragments of, this much, okay, and then the whole group kind of huddles up, and before that, so it's got no cement, no mortar, it's just dry stacked stones that has been sunk. So this entire well is basically just by digging, the whole well just kind of goes down, and in some sense, you can build a hole all the way down to China. It's that just by the weight of gravity. So that, for me, this is the project. The house, this is an enclosure that protects it. It's sort of the belly button. I'll stop here.
Do you have time for some questions? Yeah. Bijoy, I have a question, then I'll show up like you. So you talked about sort of the synapse between two finite things, that space. What is the role of memory? How does ancestral memory affect your experience of that?
I'm saying for me it's an atavistic culture. Atavism doesn't rely on memory in that sense. And so again, for me, the coding is.
But that's a hugely radical thing that you're saying.
I beg your pardon?
I think that's hugely radical. This is going to be within our context.
Yeah, that's why I say that if there is something that is traditional to us, it's affection, right? And affection does not require memory. I'm saying that's the language of transfer. If you think, and for me, like I didn't talk about it, but this idea of the hands, nothing to that, hands but I discovered that if there was a first communication that ever occurred to all of us in the room, every single one of us in the room, pretty much, the first communication of affection that came through was through the palm of our hand, abhaya. In giving and receiving. This action that we have, no? So in some way encompasses the universe in that. For me, that is the trajectory in terms of that will mitigate what you're calling things finite to allow for a possibility of depth of field.
You were talking about the core, right? And also the fact that even when you build it, you're thinking about the structure dismantling in time and falling apart, and what remains is the core. But the structure that encapsulates the core, right? And we spoke about how permeable it needs to be so that it reflects, or it wants to be, to reflect the elements. and probably from what I understand that would be contextual to where it is, where you're doing it. But can you talk a little bit more about how that structure will encapsulate the whole?
So the wooden house, for example, there are two ways to look at it. Right? I built it. If I lived in the house, in the monsoon, I wouldn't cover it with a raincoat. For me, I want my house to be wet so that the wetness in my house, so I have then this much space that I will occupy. But I have another part of the house that can remain completely open because I turn my back to the rain. Right? So it's a question of how one adjusts oneself in a landscape. Right? I'm saying that is structure. Right? For me, the physicality of the materials allows for that kind of elasticity, right?
Added
But
thing, just
but
to,
but let me say, but if a lot of people look at that, this guy's crazy. Don't ever live in his house and don't ever hire him, right? Because he said that it should rain in the middle of your house, and it does rain in the middle of my house here too, right? I'm surrounded when I sleep by rain, separated only by 5 feet left and 5 feet right.
just one quick thing to that, why when you're building, are you almost as you're building, imagining it fall apart and you're talking about the core remaining?
No, I'm
I'm
not.
just trying
It's
to understand.
not falling apart in a falling apart way, yeah. But yeah, because you have to work with gravity, right? And gravity is gravity. No, I'm saying that if you register yourself as an architectural space, eventually your physicality can dismantle, but you can still impregnate. Actually, you know what? There are clients here in the room. You should ask them that question. No, but I can tell you something. I'll share this with you. And it always was a story of Wayne Gretzky, who's this incredible, ice hockey player. And what was his greatness? And I'm not saying making any comparison here, but he was always there before the puck got there. Okay. And so for me, this whole thing is you have to be 10 steps ahead of the curve. And I'm not saying this not for the client or that allows then a mediation because you allow for the space for the client to be part of that dialogue. Right? I have to be that much. I don't want to say prepared, but that's the amount that I have to label, right, as the method of work. Right? To say, okay, because I have to allow for a different viewpoint, a different perspective. I mean, there's friends of mine, and the whole basis of their house was to be based on Vastu. I don't want to say I'm a believer or a non-believer. I'm saying for me that's a framework. I accept that. I don't accept that as a limitation, but I accept that as something that provides certain uh, boundaries. Right? But boundaries are also temporaneous. Boundaries you can sort of in some way move within them and beyond them and extend in and out from them. And so it's kind of interesting. So, so this, I built it for Sandeep, who and his wonderful family that are here. But I remember the house was built, and he tells me that day that I'm afraid of living because in Bombay, they can correct me if he will not go from one room to the other in the middle of the night. Correct me if I'm wrong on this, right? And my blood just went, just went down to my feet because this entire house is everything but that. It's all about that. And so I think for me, what is important in working with the client is not so much of what they say, it's what they don't say, but they do express in some way or the other, and to be observant to that. or to find enough space that can allow that possibility, which is at that moment in time beyond my capacity to even understand. But in this case with the Vastu, so I named it Utsav House, which is Vastu spelled backwards. So anyway, but it was a joy that way. So for me, yeah, it's, everything is a negotiation at the end of the day.
Um, I, one last question, please, and then yeah, I think Bijoy is here, so we can
Yeah,
ask
not
more
going
questions. But thank you, Bijoy. Thank you.
Thank you.